So again, thank you all for coming. This presentation is designed to be interactive, so don't hesitate to ask me questions along the way, or Ashley is here. I'd also like to acknowledge Megan McConaughey's on the call, and she and Megan and I work closely on the panel allocation. Divisions are a critical part of the annual meeting, and we're here to support the division chairs in the work that they do. So there's Ashley. Kristen Kessler is on the call. She's the meetings manager. Casey Harrigan, Director of Member Services. Dan Gibson, Communications Director, me. And as I mentioned, Megan is also on the call, who works on the panel allocation. So I'm going to review the panel allocation process for the 2021 meeting, participation rules, presentation and format trends, submission deadline in 2021 meeting, questions related to the 2021 meeting. Again, don't hold your questions till the end. If you want to ask me questions along the way, that's perfectly fine. You can either use the raise hand function, or if you wanted to put something in the chat, either way is fine with me. The panel allocation is, we have a formula for the panel allocation based 80% on panel attendance and 20% on submissions. So allocations based on panel attendance adjust for panel time slot when measuring attendance. Allocations are based on submissions, use current year data to adjust submission levels for the year. So as everybody knows, this year is an unusual year. So typically the way it would work is that we have people who count attendance in all of our panels, and then we take that raw attendance data and we adjust for time slot, so that the number that you get for purposes of the formula is what your expected attendance would be given your day and time slot. But because of the virtual meeting, we are going to use attendance data from 2019 for purposes of calculating the panel allocation for the 2021 meeting. But we will use current year submission data. So that means that when the submission deadline closes in January, that we will look at each of the number of submissions that each division gets. And if you get an unusually large number of submissions, that can essentially result in you getting what might be called a bonus allocation. So if you have an unusually high number of submissions in relationship to the number of panel slots that you would normally get without factoring in submissions, you're able to get essentially bonus submissions. So the submissions are still going to be, we're going to use current year 2021 data for the submissions, but the panel attendance will be using 2019 attendance data. So are there any questions before I move to the next slide? No questions. Okay. So this shows you the trends in division panels in the last several years. Essentially, the way that we do this is that we try to assess how many possible panels could we have based upon how much capacity we have in the hotels, or in some cases the convention center, depending upon what year it is. And then we essentially work back from that. And so the rise in number of submissions from 2016 to 2019 reflected the fact that we had more capacity in the hotels, and the fact that it declined slightly for 2020 reflected the fact that we were projecting that the available space in San Francisco was slightly less than what we had in DC in 2019. So the number of panels that were allocated in January, with the expectation that we'd be in person in San Francisco, was slightly less. Questions? Anybody have any questions? No questions. Okay. This jump from 2015 to 2016 reflected two changes we made in the program. We, for those of you who've been around APSA for a while, know that we used to have, we did not assign panel slots during the 12 to 2 noon hour lunchtime break, and so now we schedule panels from 12 to 2. So we have 5 time slots every day for when we have full days as opposed to 4. And then we shortened the time from 1 hour and 45 minutes to 1 hour and 30 minutes. So we could have more panels and 5 time slots, which allowed us to increase the number of panels that we were allocating. Okay, this is the number of submissions and the acceptance rate. In the last 3 or 4 years, the number of submissions has been relatively stable, I think you would say. If you looked at all the papers that are submitted, and if you counted each of the panels as 4 submissions, because they've had an average of 4 papers on it, we've had in the low to mid 8,000s in terms of total number of submissions in each of the years. And so again, it's fluctuated, and San Francisco and conferences on the West Coast tend to get lower number of submissions and lower attendance than on the East Coast. But overall, it's been relatively stable in terms of the number of submissions. And so I don't have any reason to expect that we wouldn't have, you know, a similar level of submissions. The only, I think, perhaps thing that's a little bit, that introduces some uncertainty into that is, well, one, of course, the pandemic in terms of what exactly are we going to be doing in September of 2021. But putting that aside, we're meeting quite late next year, and we're meeting at the end of September. And I think that it's official. I have the dates in a later slide, but it's like September 29th to like October 3rd. So APSA has never met this late, and so that also introduces some level of uncertainty, and it's in Seattle. So, questions? Anybody have any questions? Ashley or Megan, do you want to add anything?
I don't have anything to add at the moment.
Okay, Megan?
I think that covers it. I mean, as many people, I don't know if you can hear me. Okay, as many people suspect, the panel acceptance rate is slightly higher than the paper acceptance rate, but that varies a little bit by year, but I think that covers it.
Okay. Any questions?
Steve,
Okay.
there's one in the chat. Will a decision be made about if 2021 is virtual or in person?
Well, you know, I can't say for sure. I'm guessing that we would need to make a decision probably around the early part of the year, 2021. So I'm guessing January. Yeah, I mean, I think that would be my expectation, is that we would have to make a decision somewhere around early part of the year. So, Ashley, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, there's a lot of different information we'll have to look at to evaluate that, including deadlines in our contracts and things like that.
Right. Okay. So, participation rules. Participation is limited to 2 roles with a maximum of 1 paper author role. Author and co-author presentations only include actual paper presentations. Non-author appearances include appearances on roundtables. Appearing as a discussant chair does not count against the limit. So this is the basic participation rules. As the second bullet point notes, there are exceptions to this rule, but we do limit everybody to 1 presentation. Questions? Anybody have any questions? Okay. Well, here's the exemptions. And again, Ashley will circulate these slides to everybody afterwards, but theme panels, participation in a theme panel is allowed and doesn't count towards your 1 presentation. So typically the way it's worked is that the program co-chairs are assigned about 40 panels. Sometimes it's a little more, sometimes it's a little less. And so the theme panels, they have control over those panels, and participation in those panels does not count towards the general participation rule. And then there are a few other exemptions, such as status committee panels, teaching and learning, short courses, and delivery of iPoster presentations. So, anybody have any questions about this? Okay. These are the available session formats. We've expanded the number of formats that are available quite significantly in the last 3 or 4 years. And so, so you can see them. I think that one of the things I would highlight is a mini conference. Many divisions have done mini conferences quite successfully. And you can also do kind of a half-day mini conference. But if you do a mini conference, then you have to use, like an all-day mini conference would require you to use 5 panel slots. So that's the constraint on the mini conference, is that it doesn't count as one panel slot, it counts as 5 panel slots. Okay. Ashley and Megan, you can feel free to add anything if you want. So, okay. Oh, Elizabeth. Yes.
Hi. So, the number of different types of presentations has grown in recent years, and my impression is that people are somewhat confused about what some of these are and how one would apply for them. So I guess I wanted a little bit of clarity on, for example, the 30-minute paper presentations. But besides the obvious, what's on the screen, whether people apply for those expressly, who should apply. And I guess I also wonder about the difference between a workshop and a mini conference.
Okay. Ashley, do you want to take that question?
Yeah, so we have a full description of all these on the website, and we can circulate that afterwards if that answers your first one. If not, let me know and I can clarify some more. For the short course versus workshop, we've in the past couple of years tried to clarify that language, a short course being a pre-conference short course, which would mean it's on the Wednesday before the conference, whereas a workshop is usually anywhere from, it's usually 4 hours, and it's during the official program times, running from Thursday to Sunday. They're similar, but the difference I would say is the pre-conference short course on Wednesday does not count as part of your allocations. The workshop during the conference hours does. Does that answer your question?
Elizabeth, I think it is certainly true that most of the submissions still fall into the traditional categories of single papers or panels. 2 or 3 years ago, we tried to encourage 30-minute paper presentations, but we didn't have much take up. And so I mean, I think it's an interesting format, and but we haven't had a great deal of interest in some of these formats that were introduced a few years ago. So
we have noticed increased attendance, I will say, at some of them, particularly, I think, and Megan can speak more to this, mini conferences, for example. So that's been good to see.
yes.
And just one additional note on the pre-conference short courses, those are part of the submission process. So when they go to submit, it follows the same deadlines for a pre-conference short course as it does for all the other session proposals. When people submit to the conference, they're allowed to submit up to 2 things. The pre-conference short course is exempt from that. They could submit a 3rd proposal or a 4th proposal even for a pre-conference short course. The same goes for TLC at APSA.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions about this? Okay. Anand.
Hello. So I have a question about the. So I've done the chairing of a panel. I'm sorry, of a section before, and I know the system has its a complex system in the back end. All of these cross-cutting requirements, are they? In other words, will the system allow us to make a mistake in how we schedule things? Because I know that somebody can't submit more than 2 papers, but when we're planning, will it prevent us from making a mistake?
In terms of, I'm thinking, for example, if you're thinking about making a mistake in terms of overrunning the number of allocations you have, it will stop you from doing that. In terms of presenters being over those roles that Steve, or the number of roles they can have on the program, the system does prevent them from that. They will have to either, so they have an option when we send out notifications in mid-March to accept or decline a presentation. It will only allow them to accept within the participation rules. That said, they could just not respond to a role and they would be left on the program. So that's why we encourage you, and we'll talk about this more down the line, but to follow up with anybody who's a no response, just to make sure that we have a yes or no from them and that they're aware if they're on the program or not. And then internally, we run some a report that checks to make sure people aren't beyond the rules of participation.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Okay. Okay. All right, this is the annual meeting. The theme is promoting pluralism. Program chairs Valeria Sinclair Chapman at Purdue and Dino Christensen, who I believe is on the call, right? Dino, you're here?
I am here.
Thank you for taking on this role, this important role. So,
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
okay. And there's the Seattle, Washington dates, and then there's the TLC at APSA, which is on Saturday, October 2nd. And so here are some key deadlines. We're going to open the call for papers in late September, meaning sometime in the next couple of weeks. Call for proposals closes on January 14th. January 21 proposal review begins March 1st. And then there's mid-March 2021 proposal notifications. And so, so Ashley or Megan, could you address the issue of co-sponsorship
And
You-
Steve, I'm gonna punt that one to Megan, but I just wanted to add a quick note on all this information. We are circulating these slides and this recording around to everyone. And then in addition, we will be providing a handbook, which is rather lengthy, that walks you through all the steps of this process. Probably within the next week, we'll try to send everything all together. So hopefully that will answer any remaining questions you have. And again, we have Andy and hopefully Maureen will join us at the end for any best practices or procedural questions you have in terms of your volunteer role. Megan, do you want to talk a little bit about the co-sponsorship?
Yeah, I mean, so for co-sponsorship, we definitely encourage people to reach out to other divisions and co-sponsor. It's a good way to increase your audience. We do find that co-sponsored panels in general get more attendance than non-co-sponsored panels. And obviously, we know that people are interested in attendance because these are exciting things and you want to share them with people, but also that affects your allocations for next year. In terms of how that affects your allocation, each co-sponsoring division gets full credit for the attendance at the co-sponsored panel. So it feeds into both divisions' averages and expected or estimated attendance numbers equally.
Any questions on co-sponsorship? Okay. All right. So I'm gonna stop my screen share and open it up to any questions. And I believe we have Andy on the call who might have some thoughts about the division chair role based upon his own experience.
I'm definitely here. I don't know, what do you want me to share anything, or do you want me to answer questions? I don't know what people want, what information people want.
I think if you want to start with just kind of a summary of how it went for you, you had one of the biggest divisions this year, so you have a wide range of knowledge and how that goes. And understanding this year was a little bit different. Our volunteers this year put in a lot of work switching to the virtual meeting, so many thanks for that. So if you have a brief summary of what worked well for you, some things you learned along the way that perhaps weren't as evident in the materials we circulated that, and hopefully I can add those moving forward.
I think the materials that we received from Ashley were the most helpful, especially with individual tasks. The APSA system, the conference system is, I'm sure it is probably the best one that we can find, but it is not always intuitive in terms of how it works. And so what I found was that I just had to familiarize myself with it, and there really wasn't a way for me to mess it up. So if I accidentally did something, it would move a presenter or a paper to a different queue, but it would never delete it from me entirely. Or if I lost it for some reason, Ashley could help me find it again. So I really didn't feel like there was any issue there. Probably the biggest thing that we did was that when we got the initial submissions, we copied and pasted everything into an Excel spreadsheet. And that's really important because once you start rejecting papers and or they start moving to other, so like if they come to you as a first choice and then you say no, they go to the second choice panel, they don't come back to you again. And so if you need to fill slots later on, then you would need to remember what you had, and it's much easier to find if you know what those papers were. I think that was probably the major thing that we had. And then our session was so big, we had two people, but really two co-program chairs, but I really handled the online system, and my co-chair kind of handled a lot of other communications. The other thing that we did was we really utilized the APSA system repeatedly for emails, messages to participants. So we, hold on just a second. We use the online system to contact people about discussion, to get them to respond to calls for participation. I found that oftentimes it was important for me to copy that information over into my own personal email because sometimes they weren't responding to system emails, but they would respond to me. And so that made a little bit of a difference sometimes. But otherwise, I think the most important thing we did was we just kept sending messages and trying to contact people. We used, if somebody wasn't responsive on a panel, we would try to email the panel coordinators or the chair of the panel because they usually knew each other. So there were just a lot of different ways we tried to get people to respond. It was a little more complicated this year, as Ashley said, because we went through sort of 2 rounds. We went through the creation of the panels and then sort of everybody confirms for in-person. And then when that sort of moved to virtual, we repeated that whole step again. Hopefully this year we'll know with enough advance notice so that you don't have to do that because that was a big challenge for us. But otherwise, I think the steps that we got from APSA were really helpful, and the reporting functions and everything like that work just the way that they say they do. So I didn't have any other problems with it.
Okay. Thank you, Andy. Any questions for Andy? No more questions.
Well, I guess I have a question. I'm just wondering, you're talking about sort of splitting the tasks between someone who's primarily handling communication and someone who's sort of dealing with the panel system. In retrospect, was that sort of about an equal amount of time and effort? Is that a way you would recommend we try and allocate responsibility?
I don't have a good answer for that. What I found was that I got really good at using the system. And so just economies of scale meant that it was easier for me to just jump in and do things when we had to. So for example, if you have to add somebody or move them to a new role from a presenter to a non-presenter, or you have to move a paper around, if you're familiar with the system, then it goes faster for you to just do it than it is for you to try to email your counterpart back and forth and then figure out who's going to do it and all that kind of stuff. So for us, that just made sense. For others, it may not work as well. What we did was, again, we had everything in a spreadsheet originally. We all read the proposals, the 2 of us, and then we made individual assessments, and then we had a meeting together where we made joint decisions. So really what I'm talking about is just the actual system management component. But we decided everything together, what to name the panels we created, which ones to accept, which ones to reject, all that kind of stuff.
Okay. Any other questions? I know there's been quite a few questions posted to the chat here. Ashley, do you want anything else you want to add here to the conversation?
Yeah, I'm just kind of looking through some of the questions here.
I think the last one I can sort of reply. I think so. This is there a pool of proposals that end up rejected that you can search again? That's why you have to. For us, you put it into a spreadsheet because there isn't a way for you to go back and just search for those things. So what we did again was we kept a list of everybody that came to us, especially as first choice, but you could do that again as second choice. And then if papers fell out of the process, you could always go ask Ashley to help you find them again and reallocate them. Once you say no, they leave your section and go elsewhere. Once the second person says no, I think they leave both sections and go off into a third queue that maybe, I think Ashley, you can see, but if you can provide her with the name of the panel, she can find it and send it back to you again. So that is helpful, but you can't see because the rejected pool would be all papers for all sections, you don't really get to see a pool of everything that's been rejected across the board. So the spreadsheet can be really helpful for later on when you're filling in gaps. And for us, what we did was as we were reading them, we wrote down keywords so that we could also help search for panel or for papers that might fit a topic panel best. So we had 2 or 3 keywords per one, and then we sort of ranked them like high, medium, low kind of a thing about our priority preferences. And then the 2 of our program chairs for our section met and talked about that. And then later on, when gaps opened, we could search that spreadsheet for things we thought were both things that we just didn't have room for that fit, but also that that fit the panel topic pretty quickly and easily. And that worked really well for us.
And to add to that, we are adding a keyword feature this year. So when submitters go in, they can tag up to 3 keywords. I am still working with our developer on what that looks from a division chair standpoint, but hopefully that will help with some of that locating proposals procedure that Andy mentioned.
There's a question too about transferred panels. So Ashley can probably talk more about the timing, but the transferred panels come to you as people start doing their panel allocations. So there isn't really, they just sort of fall into your queue as you're building your own schedule. So as far as whether you should leave space or could leave space, I think that's kind of up to you. What we found was that most of the time when full panels transferred to us, they weren't as good of a fit. Most of the panels we accepted were first choice panels. We did take 1 or 2, I think, that transferred over to us. The papers were often closer to a better fit. But again, how much space you leave is up to you. They're entering and leaving your queue while you're putting things together. So the earlier you start on yours, the fewer transfers you'll see as you build your program, the closer you get to the deadline, because we all sort of wait and meet the deadline, right? The closer you get to the deadline, the more transfers start popping into your system. I will say that when the transfers come up, one of the hard things is if a transfer comes to you and you reject it, it goes back to where it came from. And so we had a couple cases where program chairs kept trying to bounce things over to us, and we would say no, and then they would send it back over again, and we would say no, until finally we had to email them and say, look, we're telling you no, please stop sending it over here. Because there's nothing with a transfer, you either accept it and it enters your queue and then you take responsibility, or you reject it and send it back where it came from, and then they either have to accept or reject. So it's kind of a 2-step process. You have to accept the transfer, and then once you accept it, you can accept or reject. I know that seems a little weird, but it might make more sense when it happens to you. But otherwise, it ping-pongs back and forth between panels, and that got frustrating for us a little bit at times, but didn't happen very often.
This is actually helpful for me because I don't see so much as how you all work being on the other kind of side of it, but I'm going to be looking into what we can do to prevent that from happening.
I think what it was is that, like I said, I don't think people realize that, like, when they transferred it, I think they thought it left them permanently as opposed to coming back to them. And once we said, no, it doesn't really fit with our section, it would go back to where it came from, and then it sort of just sat there.
Andy, how did you think about panels that might fit into the theme panel category?
We proposed, I mean, none of ours were accepted for that, but we did propose 3 or 4 for it. What we did was we just looked at the theme, and then we looked at especially the panels. I think you can only, I can't remember if you can only pick the ones that were pre-created, but we just looked through the list and we tried to find ones that we thought overlapped with the main theme. And then we tried to limit ourselves to a couple. I want to say we sent somewhere between 2 and 4 that we thought fit the theme, broadly conceived. And then the program chairs for the conference will make their decision before you have to make your decision. And if they decide that they don't want it, you still have the ability to vote up or down on it. So we reserved space in our schedule for the possibility that those would come back to us. And then we just kind of waited to settle everything until after the APSA co-chairs made their decision.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. Okay. Any other questions for Andy?
Oh, there's someone asked about co-sponsorship if the panel proposer doesn't suggest it. The co-chairs just talked, and we just made it happen. And that was a good way to work with panel allocation. So as things kind of got towards the end and we worked on co-sponsorship, we started just emailing different chairs and saying, we think this one might work for you. And would you be willing? And Ashley can respond to this one, but they asked about how it counts against allocations. I want to say the allocation is split then, right? It's 50-50.
So it used to be that way. Now
Okay.
it counts towards the one hosting the panel.
But the attendance.
The attendance counts for both. Yes, the allocation counts to whoever's hosting it. So what we usually see in terms of the allocation is they trade panels and then they both get attendance from both panels that they're on.
And that's why the co-chairs would often email each other as that happened, because if it made sense for somebody to get a co-sponsorship for one panel, they might propose that you co-sponsor another one in response. And then you both get credit for the attendance at the two panels. It's kind of a win-win.
And as Megan said, this generally ends up helping the numbers when the co-sponsorship's done because it gets co-branded in the online program as well as the print program.
Let's see. Rebecca asked about how many theme panels will the organizers accept. Generally speaking, the program co-chairs are given about 40 panels that they have to work with. And some years they actually accept less. And then some years they work with Ashley to see if they can add a few more that fit into the theme, depending upon the situation. But it's around 40 panels. So
the next question asks about bumping people to a different section that they didn't ask for. That's the transfer function. So if you think it fits, so conflict processes was my section. If we thought it fit better with human rights, we would just transfer it to human rights. And that's where we were talking about, they have to accept it for it to enter into their queue. I will say Ashley probably heard from me way too much but she was my go-to on everything for that I had questions with. So definitely she's a great resource.
But can I follow up on that?
Yeah.
What if it's a division that they haven't even indicated? So an author might be surprised, oh wait, why is my paper in this section and not where I thought it was going to end up?
That's okay.
That's okay. Okay. All right.
Yeah. So you can transfer it over there, and then that's where the chair of that panel or that section will see it. And if they don't think it fits, they'll just bump it back to you and have you make a decision. But if they do think it fits, they'll accept it and make a decision on it. And then I think, I could be wrong, Ashley will correct me, but I think that then replaces you as a choice, right? So if you were the first choice and you accepted it and then you rejected it in the end, I think it does still travel to their second choice before it then moves off into no man's land, no person's land.
Yeah, it's mapped, I believe, to go to that second choice still. I will say I've been with APSA for 7 years now, and I don't think or at least it's not come to my attention that anybody's ever complained about being accepted to, say, a division that they weren't intending, that they hadn't submitted to, and I imagine that has happened.
Yeah, we definitely accepted transfers, and they either both panels and papers that ended up in our section and on our schedule.
any other questions?
I'm also just curious if Andy, you can say something about like, how much time you think went into all of this, just for planning purposes.
So it ultimately is going to depend on the size of the section and your co-chairs. There were some other complications this year with COVID and teaching and childcare and like all that kind of stuff. So next year will hopefully run different for all of you all, right? I would say that the first pass takes a significant amount of time because you have to look at all of the proposals. You're looking at we did the panels first, so we knew what was left. But then you're looking at all the paper abstracts, you're trying to create panels where there weren't panels before. Then you've got the discussant and share duties. There are almost never enough volunteers, at least in our section, for that. And so we had to send out additional announcements. When we sent the announcements out, lots of people said yes. And so at that point, I just kept a folder in my email box of people that had already agreed to help me at that point. And I just kept going back to that over and over again. But that initial building the panel does take a fair amount of time. So the sooner you start on it, the better. And Ashley's communications to you will say, start right away, don't wait till the last minute. She's right. We should have started earlier than we did, but we did start in advance of the deadline for exactly that reason. Later on, once you're filling in holes, I think that takes less time. At least that was my experience. So once people start accepting and declining, I think where we had to spend the most time was chasing people down just to get them to say yes or no about their participation. But once we knew that they were not in, then it was easy to go back and find somebody to fill the spot. And what we did was we often would promote people from our poster session to a panel and then fill the poster slot because it just worked out easier. They had often already agreed to do something, then they were excited that they were presenting. And so we were able to just kind of use the poster session for us as a way to move things that we liked into panels and then fill the poster slot behind it. It only worked if there was an overlap with the topic of the panel, but we found that that was really a good way for us to do it.
Megan, someone asked in the chat, if you accept a proposal from another section, does that count toward your section's overall submissions number that goes to the 20%? I don't believe it does, but.
Right, the answer to that is no, because we have to complete the panel allocation process before people start accepting submissions. So that submission number is fixed as soon as the submission system closes. And so then the submission system closes, we start pulling those submission numbers so we can complete the allocation process and get that information out to you.
And we try to get the final allocation numbers to everybody about a week after the submission system closes. So the system will close on the 14th of January. So you would be getting allocation numbers around the 21st of January.
And then from there, that's when we open the system and that busy time of the process that Andy referenced starts. That's when you do your acceptance, rejection, and then your construction of panels.
Okay. All right. Ashley, any concluding comments here?
We'll be circulating the handbook, a recording of this webinar and the slides, and just many thanks to Andy. It's always helpful to have somebody who actually does the process from the volunteer side to answer some of these questions and talk more about that division of labor that he referenced. It's very helpful. So thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you for coming. Don't hesitate to email us if you have more questions. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Megan. And take care. See you in 2021. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.